It was the last weekend before school started, and the kind of summer night that felt like it was trying to stretch itself out. Heat still clinging to the backyard lawn furniture, music pulsing too loud from a Bluetooth speaker, and kids clumping around the pool deck like nothing bad could ever happen in a place like this. 16-year-old Ellie Vaughn was one of about 30 teenagers packed into the Franklin family's backyard for a neighborhood party. The hosts were the kind of laid-back parents who trusted kids to be smart. And by all accounts, it wasn't a wild night, just Red Bulls, soda, and a drained in-ground pool that had been turned into a makeshift dance pit. But by morning, Ellie was gone. Not just unaccounted for, but gone in a way that made no sense. No Uber, no sightings, no messages. Just gone. The house was in an upper-middle-class neighborhood in Fair Hill, Oregon. Everyone knew everyone, or at least knew someone who did. The pool had been empty for years, too expensive to maintain, so the owners had fenced it off and sometimes let the teens use it as a party spot. That night, someone had strung fairy lights across the rim, plugged in a speaker, and thrown in a few folding chairs. Ellie arrived with two close friends, neither of whom reported anything unusual about her mood. She wasn't drinking, wasn't arguing with anyone, and stayed near the group most of the night, until she didn't. According to a timeline later pieced together from texts and Snapchats, Ellie was last captured on someone's phone around 11:30 p.m., dancing in the shallow end of the pool with three other girls. By 12:10 a.m., no one could say exactly where she was. Her friends assumed she'd stepped out to call her mom or use the bathroom. It wasn't until 12:45 that someone noticed her stuff, a small purse, flip-flops, and her phone, still sitting on a lounge chair beside the pool. By 1 a.m., people were texting her, calling her name, and walking the property with flashlights. But the tone wasn't panic. Not yet. Teenagers vanish from their own parties all the time, only to reappear in someone else's Instagram story by morning. But this was different. Ellie's phone had not moved. Her purse still had her house key. No one had seen her leave. By the time police were notified the following morning, the party had already ended and the backyard cleaned. Trash bags were full, speakers unplugged, pool empty as it always was. The Vaughns were frantic. Ellie had never run away, never spent a night out without checking in. Her mom reported that the last text Ellie had sent her that evening said, "I'll be back by 12:30. Don't wait up." That message was time-stamped 10:49 p.m. It was the last thing she would ever send. Police started with the logical assumptions. Maybe she'd gotten a ride with someone and left in secret. Maybe there'd been a fight and she was cooling off somewhere. Maybe she had run away. But none of those theories explained her belongings, especially the phone. Her search history, text threads, and camera roll all pointed to an ordinary night. Nothing planned, no signs of distress, no secret meeting. One thread, with her friend Katie, showed a live exchange from about 10:30 p.m. "I think he's here," followed by a heart emoji. Katie asked who, and Ellie never replied. By the second day, the case was elevated. A missing persons bulletin was circulated. Police brought in a K-9 unit. Dogs traced Ellie's scent around the perimeter, to the patio, and then, curiously, to the deep end of the pool. But not out of it. One officer noted that the scent ended near a cluster of pool toys that had been shoved to the corner, inflatable rings, deflated balls, and an old hose tangled near the drain. The dogs circled there, whined, and then lost the trail. A full search of the pool basin yielded nothing. There were no crawl spaces, no grates, no obvious places to hide a person. Still, the detail stuck. So did a comment from a sophomore girl who told police she'd seen Ellie sitting alone near the pool's edge sometime after midnight, elbows on her knees, head down, crying. The girl hadn't thought much of it. "Maybe someone broke up with her," she said. "But when I looked again like 5 minutes later, she was just, gone." The lead detective would later say that this case was disturbing because of its simplicity. A closed setting. Known attendees. Zero physical evidence of a struggle, flight, or injury. Theories piled up online. Was she lured into a car? Had someone from outside the party entered through the unlocked side gate? Did she fall and get injured somewhere out of sight? One Reddit post speculated that the pool had hidden her body somehow, an idea quickly dismissed by officials who confirmed it had been bone dry for years. The Vaughns couldn't reconcile the facts. No signs of a plan, no friends claiming a secret, no mental health issues, history of running away or double life. Just one teenage girl, midsummer, stepping away from music for a moment and then never returning. What haunted people most wasn't just that Ellie disappeared, but that she did so silently, in plain sight, in a place designed for fun. Everyone had been watching, and yet no one had seen it happen. The investigation officially began at 8:06 a.m. when officers from the Fairhill Police Department arrived at the Vaughn residence to file the initial missing persons report. Ellie hadn't come home, hadn't called, and her phone was still dead. Her parents had spent the early hours calling every friend, walking the block, and circling back to the Franklin house where the party had ended sometime after 1 a.m. Nothing seemed immediately out of place. The backyard was quiet, the pool still dry, just an echo of music and motion lingering from the night before. But Ellie wasn't there, and that was all that mattered. Detectives started with a basic containment check. There were 3 exits from the Franklin property: a locked front gate, a side yard opening near the garage, and a small back gate leading to a walking trail. All 3 had been unlocked during the party. No one remembered locking them after. The Franklin family didn't have security cameras, and neither did their closest neighbors. A retired couple next door had a camera facing their own driveway, but it only captured their porch light flicking on and off around midnight, triggered by bugs or motion. No signs of movement, no cars, no shadows. It was like the night had swallowed Ellie whole without making a sound. Officers brought in a K-9 unit by early afternoon. The dogs were taken around the house, through the yard, and finally into the drained pool. That's where things got strange. The scent trail led to the shallow end, where Ellie had last been seen dancing, and then faded. Not outward, not toward a gate, just stopped, somewhere near the corner where someone had left an old towel, a plastic water bottle, and a lawn chair that had tipped sideways in the night. The dog circled a few times, then sat. It wasn't definitive, but it was enough to raise eyebrows. Search teams scanned the property. They used thermal imaging on the pool walls, knocked on concrete, tested the shed, and examined beneath the wooden deck. No signs of forced entry, no blood, no fibers, no items belonging to Ellie beyond what she'd left on the chair. A purse with her inhaler, a lip balm, and a charging cable. Her phone was on 2% battery when police accessed it. The last activity was an unsent message in her notes app. It read, "Just leave me alone." That discovery shifted the tone. Investigators focused on Ellie's phone data, pulling call logs, texts, and app activity. Several conversations painted a picture of increasing stress. She had been texting with her ex-boyfriend Liam Sharp on and off all week. The exchanges started casually, even flirtatious, but turned hostile 2 days before the party. She told one friend over text, "He won't stop. He's got nothing to lose anymore." Her mother later told police she overheard Ellie on the phone that morning whispering, "He won't stop texting me." When asked who she meant, Ellie only shrugged. Liam admitted to being at the party but claimed he left around midnight. He said he didn't talk to Ellie that night. Other witnesses told different stories. One girl claimed she saw them arguing behind the shed. Another swore they were nowhere near each other all night. A third said they were definitely seen hugging near the patio lights around 11:45. Everyone had something slightly different to say, and in the absence of hard evidence, every version carried weight. Detectives noted inconsistencies in Liam's timeline. His phone data showed him pinged near the neighborhood until 12:28 a.m., then offline for over an hour. When asked, he said he'd driven. Around to clear his head, police asked to search Liam's car. He refused. His parents retained a lawyer. No warrant was granted. Without probable cause, the case stalled. Friends were brought back in for second interviews. A few admitted the party wasn't as calm as first reported. There had been drinks, a bottle of vodka passed around, someone possibly spiking a soda with something stronger. No one could confirm what Ellie had or hadn't consumed. Toxicology was impossible. There was no body, no clothes, no glass, no trace. Over the next few days, the Franklin backyard became a staging ground. CSI units re-examined the pool with ultraviolet and infrared tools. No fluids, no drag marks, no hair, no impressions. Just a cement hole in the ground, chipped in places, sun-faded, but clean. The surrounding lawn was dug up in 3 places based on cadaver dog alerts. Nothing found. Drones were flown over the neighborhood in a widening pattern. Nearby woods searched, creek beds checked. Surveillance footage from local traffic cams showed no unidentified vehicles during the key time frame. The search radius expanded, then stalled. Word spread through the school and neighborhood. Posters went up, hashtags appeared. The community held a candlelight vigil. The Vaughns issued a plea. "We don't care what happened, we just want our daughter home." But underneath the public show of unity, cracks were forming. Rumors swirled. Some said Ellie had been pregnant, others claimed she had run off with someone from out of state. One theory, pushed by a classmate's anonymous post, claimed Ellie had overdosed and someone panicked and cleaned it up. Another thread floated the idea of a hidden access point under the pool, an old maintenance shaft sealed decades ago. None of it could be confirmed. Most of it couldn't be disproved either. By the 7th day, the case was labeled suspicious disappearance with potential foul play. But without a crime scene, without a suspect, and without a single camera angle showing her leaving or being taken, police were left with a question no one could answer. How does someone vanish from a house full of people with no footage, no witnesses, and no trace, except a dead-end scent trail in the shallow end of a dry pool? The digital forensics team moved fast in the days after Ellie's disappearance, pulling her phone records, app data, and message threads to build a clearer picture of her final hours. Ellie had always been active online. Instagram, Snapchat, texts, and notes, leaving behind a daily breadcrumb trail most teens don't think twice about. But sometime around 11:40 p.m. the night of the party, everything just stopped. Her texts, normally rapid-fire with friends, slowed. Her last Instagram view was at 11:36 p.m. The final outgoing message was a text to her best friend, Katie. "I feel weird. I think he spiked something timestamp, 11:42 p.m. The message was never opened. Pranisrol. Phone had died during the party. She wouldn't see it until the following morning, long after it was too late. That message reframed everything. It wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It was potentially a drugging. And if Ellie had been impaired, that could explain why she walked off alone or why no one noticed her leave, if she left at all. Investigators pulled as many leftover drink containers from the party as they could find, discarded cups, unopened cans, half-empty bottles and trash bags, and sent them for testing. After 4 days, the toxicology results came back. 2 of the soda bottles tested positive for benzodiazepines. The dose was low, but enough to cause drowsiness, disorientation, and loss of short-term memory. Whoever had consumed it may not have known what was happening until it was too late. The discovery put immediate pressure on everyone at the party, especially those who had been near Ellie during that window of time. Her ex-boyfriend, Liam, was one of them. He claimed again he hadn't spoken to Ellie that night, but his phone records didn't align. The digital trail showed repeated text attempts to Ellie between 10:45 and 11:20 p.m. 5 messages in total, all deleted. Investigators retrieved them from his cloud backup. One of them read, "Don't make it worse than it is." Another, "You said you wouldn't make a scene." The tone wasn't overtly threatening, but it was confrontational, and it directly contradicted Liam's claim that they hadn't interacted that night at all. Liam's lawyer issued a statement saying the texts were emotionally charged but irrelevant, part of a difficult breakup, and that Liam had done nothing wrong. But it didn't sit well. Friends started coming forward, quietly, one by one. A girl from Ellie's chemistry class said she saw Liam walk up to Ellie behind the pool shed. Another, who had left the party early, said she overheard someone arguing near the garden hose, but couldn't tell who it was. Then a photo surfaced from a partygoer's phone. Blurry. Low light. but time-stamped at 11:47 p.m. It showed a group near the pool deck. Ellie was partially visible, sitting on the edge. Beside her stood a figure matching Liam's height and build. No one else in the photo could identify the person with certainty. The face was turned away, but the time matched. 5 minutes after the last text, 3 minutes before the scent trail ended in the shallow end of the pool. Police attempted to question Liam again. He declined. His family had retained legal counsel and issued a blanket refusal to all voluntary interviews. Without a warrant or physical evidence, investigators couldn't press further. But the tension in the community grew. Parents of other kids at the party began calling the department. Some offered second-hand information, rumors that Ellie had been drinking from a cup Liam handed her, or that someone saw her stumble slightly around 11:30. Others warned that the pressure on Liam was unfair, that people were starting to treat him like a suspect without proof. Still, the timing, the messages, and Ellie's final text created a pattern that couldn't be ignored. Investigators went deeper into Liam's phone metadata. A tech specialist recovered fragments of a deleted note file, likely written earlier that week. One sentence was still intact. She said she'd tell. I didn't think she meant it. It was never dated, never sent, and couldn't be confirmed as referring to Ellie. But the implication lingered. Meanwhile, detectives tried to determine if anyone else at the party had access to the drinks that tested positive. A partial fingerprint was lifted from one of the bottles. It didn't belong to Ellie. It didn't belong to Liam either. It matched a boy named Hunter, another party guest and a mutual friend. When questioned, Hunter admitted he'd brought the drinks but claimed he didn't spike them and didn't see who might have. He described the party as loud, chill, nothing crazy. But he also said something investigators didn't expect. According to Hunter, Liam and Ellie had gone off by the trees around 11:40 p.m. He assumed they were arguing. She didn't look scared, he said, just mad. That detail opened up a new path. Investigators began mapping the backyard with precise timelines. Ellie's text at 11:42 p.m., Hunter's sighting minutes later, the photo at 11:47, the last known visual. But after that, nothing. Not a shadow, not a door sensor, not a single sighting from a yard full of teenagers. The scent trail ended at the edge of the pool. The text thread ended 5 minutes before that. And the boy who admitted to arguing with her claimed he left alone. With no footage, no confession, and no body, there was nothing to charge. But for Ellie's parents, the evidence told a different story. They believed someone had drugged her. They believed the text she sent was the beginning of her panic, and that whatever happened next was covered up. The investigators believed it too, but without physical proof, it stayed a theory. And the person who might have been able to explain what really happened during those 5 crucial minutes near the pool had stopped talking long before they'd even started asking. By the 4th week, the media coverage had slowed, tips had dried up, and Ellie's case was losing momentum. The search parties dwindled. Flyers started to curl at the corners. Her name was still spoken in school hallways and whispered between neighbors. But the urgency had faded into that quiet, awkward space where everyone was waiting for something, anything, to shake the silence. Ellie's parents weren't ready to give up. They hired a private team of cadaver dog handlers, retired law enforcement officers who had worked recovery cases across the state. On a cool Sunday morning, with the Franklin family's reluctant permission, the team returned to the backyard where Ellie had last been seen. The goal was simple: cover the ground again, inch by inch, with fresh noses and no bureaucratic red tape in the way. The dogs showed immediate interest in the pool area, again, but this time one of them moved past the deep end and began sniffing near the small plastic shed that sat beside the pool deck. It was a narrow structure, sun-bleached and filled with old tools, hoses, and gardening supplies. The dog's handler noted a strong change in behavior near the back wall, scratching, whining, then sitting, an alert response. The other dog followed, echoing the same reaction. To the team it was significant: 2 independent alerts, the scent of human remains, or at least decomposition, potentially traced to that exact spot. The property owner refused further access. The shed belonged to the Franklins, who were already overwhelmed with media attention and legal questions. They asked everyone to leave. The private team backed off, but documented everything. Ellie's parents brought the findings to the local police. At first, they were told it wasn't enough. The shed had been searched already, visually cleared in the first days after her disappearance. But the new alerts forced a second look. A request for a warrant was filed. The Franklins pushed back. It took another 8 days before a judge signed off. A new search was authorized. Crime scene techs arrived with forensic tools, excavation equipment, and hopes of finally breaking the case open. But when the shed was cleared out and its floor panels removed, there was nothing. No trapdoor, no crawl space, no indication of any void beneath the foundation, just compacted dirt and insulation foam. No human remains, no disturbed soil, no fibers. The chlorine drums were rusted but empty, the old tiles stacked neatly. Another dead end. News of the failed search leaked within hours. Online interest in the case surged again, but this time with skepticism. Some claimed the police were hiding something. Others believed the shed had been cleaned before the search. Reddit threads sprang up by the dozens. One particularly viral theory suggested that Ellie's body had been temporarily hidden beneath the shed in a small maintenance void, then removed before the search order was granted. A diagram was posted showing possible crawlspace configurations common in suburban homes built in the late 90s. The Franklin house matched the build. Commenters fixated on a detail from earlier reports. The cadaver dog's original scent alert had ended near the shallow end of the pool, just feet from the shed's corner. To internet sleuths, that wasn't a coincidence. It was a trail. Another theory took hold, more extreme, that the pool itself had been altered to conceal something, that beneath the concrete basin was a service cavity, once used for plumbing or access, now sealed over. That Ellie had never left the backyard because she had been buried beneath it. Police issued a public statement rejecting the idea. Their structural engineers had reviewed the pool's construction documents. No substructure, no hollow space, just poured concrete and rebar. The chief investigator said plainly, "There is no hidden room under that pool." But for Ellie's parents, the idea wasn't so easily dismissed. They'd seen the dogs respond. They'd felt the moment hope returned, however briefly. The absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence, not to them. They asked for ground-penetrating radar scans. The department declined, too costly, not justified. And there was still no proof of a crime, no body, no confession, no forensic evidence. Ellie was still officially categorized as missing under suspicious circumstances. That meant resources were limited, leads needed prioritization, and new searches required cause. With each passing day, it became harder to justify another pass over the same property. Investigators began to shift focus to broader search areas, creek beds, remote trails, secondary tips. The Franklin property, in the eyes of the department, had been exhausted. But Ellie's mother kept circling back. She began sketching the backyard from memory, not to scale, just emotion. Where Ellie had danced, where she last left her shoes, where the dogs had sat. She circled the shallow end in red ink, the shed in blue. The space in between she marked with nothing. Just silence. She showed it to the detective once. He nodded politely, told her they were doing everything they could. She folded the paper and put it in her purse. She still carries it. The crawlspace theory was never officially closed. It just faded, like the others. But for those who believed Ellie never left that yard, it was the last time the case felt close to breaking. After that, the leads grew colder. Her parents stopped getting updates. The public moved on. And a month that had once felt like the start of something turned into the first milestone in a mystery that was beginning to settle into its shape, one with no answers, no resolution, and no direction forward, just an empty yard and a girl no one could find. 9 months after Ellie Vaughn disappeared, another student from Fairhill High dropped out. Her name was Ashley Rourke. Same grade, same neighborhood, same party. She was never listed as a suspect, never mentioned in the early investigation. Quiet girl. Not especially close to Ellie, but not a stranger either. The two had shared a biology class and some mutual friends. According to school records, Ashley had been present at the party the night Ellie vanished but had left early, around midnight, or so she claimed. She wasn't interviewed during the first round of questioning. Her name didn't come up in any text messages, call logs, or statements. She'd gone unnoticed, just another face in a crowd of teenagers who remembered the music more than the details. After her withdrawal from school, her family moved out of Fairhill. No reason given publicly. Her parents cited personal matters, nothing more. Investigators at the time were focused elsewhere, chasing new leads, reviewing forensic possibilities, expanding the search radius. Ashley's departure wasn't flagged. It was only years later, in late 2020, that her name resurfaced under completely different circumstances. She was admitted to a hospital following a suicide attempt. She survived, but in the hours before she was found, Ashley had written a letter, pages long, most of which was kept private by her family. One portion, however, was shared with police. It mentioned that night, and the words that stood out even years later were these: "I remember the sound. I remember feeling like someone was under the deck, watching, like it wasn't over, like it was going to reach back up and pull me down too." That statement jolted the case awake. Detectives reopened Ashley's file. They discovered she had indeed been at the Franklin party, confirmed by a blurry group photo and a tagged post from another student. Her phone records showed she had left the party by 12:02 a.m., but her phone went offline for over an hour immediately after. When asked, her parents declined to have her questioned, citing her fragile condition. Ashley herself refused contact with law enforcement, but her parents allowed access to a set of journals recovered from her bedroom. In one entry, dated almost 2 years after Ellie's disappearance, Ashley wrote, "I heard her cry. I didn't help. I thought it would stop. I kept thinking someone else would go first." It was the first piece of writing, outside of Ellie's own texts, that suggested someone might have witnessed what happened, or at least heard it. The language was vague but emotional. There was no direct confession, no name, no location. But there were other entries, some in fragmented sentences. "It happened under everyone's feet. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. She said stop. He didn't." These lines couldn't be verified, but they were haunting. Investigators attempted to clarify details through the family, asking if Ashley had ever spoken aloud about the pool, the shed, or the events of that night. Her parents said no. They didn't even know she had kept a journal until the hospital staff returned her belongings. The entries, they said, were scattered, often undated, and written like someone was trying to forget something while being unable to. Ashley's refusal to speak directly made things difficult. Without a statement, there was no way to corroborate her presence at a specific location during the window Ellie disappeared. Her phone data only proved she left the party around midnight. But the gap in her digital footprint was significant. No texts, no calls, no location pings until nearly 1:30 a.m. And when it came back online, her phone was pinging from a wooded trail nearly a mile away, one that curved behind several of the homes in the neighborhood, including the Franklin property. There were theories. One was that Ashley had seen something, panicked, and run. Another was that she had been involved in covering something up. But the most persistent theory, the one that stuck with Ellie's parents, was that Ashley had stayed longer than she admitted, that she'd hidden or frozen, that maybe Ellie hadn't vanished alone, that someone had heard her, even just for a moment, and done nothing. Investigators reviewed the crawl space theory again, this time with Ashley's writing in mind. One line in particular, "Under everyone's feet," brought them back to the pool deck. They submitted another request to rescan the Franklin property. It was denied. No new physical evidence, no grounds for another warrant. Ashley moved again, no forwarding address. Her family disconnected from the community. Her name disappeared from public records within a year. To this day, she has never spoken publicly about the party, about Ellie, or about the journals. Her entries remain part of the case file. No charges were filed. Nothing in the writing was admissible. But for Ellie's parents, it was the closest thing they had to a witness, someone who was there, someone who might have known what was happening just feet away, beneath the noise, under the deck, near the waterline of an empty pool where a 16-year-old girl had cried once and was never seen again. By 2022, the Franklin family had sold the house. The weight of Ellie's disappearance had never really left the property, and after years of whispers, online theories, and police visits, they decided it was time to move. The home sat on the market for nearly 7 months before a buyer stepped forward. A couple from out of state, unaware of the full history, made the purchase. They were told there had once been a missing person case linked to the neighborhood, but not much more. The listing made no mention of the empty pool or the rumors that had clung to its concrete walls like stains. Once the papers were signed, the family moved in and began minor renovations. The pool was on their list, but it was never filled. Local drought conditions were part of the reason. That summer, the county had issued strict water restrictions. Filling a residential pool was considered non-essential. But even beyond that, the couple said they felt uncomfortable around it. The wife later admitted to a neighbor that something about the deep end made her uneasy. The smell, she said, was strange, like wet earth, even when the surface was dry. Her husband dismissed it, said it was probably old algae clinging to the concrete. They scrubbed it out, drained the runoff, and bleached the steps. But the smell returned. Not strong, not offensive, just faint and sour, musty, like something that shouldn't still be there. Across the street, an older neighbor who had lived there long before Ellie went missing started taking notes. He kept track of every time the new owners cleaned the pool. He noticed when they stopped going near it entirely. In late fall, he called the non-emergency police line and reported what he described as a persistent odor from the Franklin property. He said it was strongest after rain, that it seemed to come up from the ground itself, especially near the southern wall of the pool. The dispatcher logged it, but no follow-up was made. By then, Ellie's case had already cycled through 3 different investigative units. Each new lead detective inherited the same cold file: dozens of pages, fragments of text threads, dog alerts, inconsistent witness statements, and 0 forensic evidence. The new owners of the house were never interviewed. No new search warrant was requested. By every official measure, the case was inactive. There had been no new tips, no bodies, no legal justification to re-enter the property. But Ellie's parents had never stopped asking. They wrote emails, left voicemails, occasionally visited the station in person. Most of the time, they were met with polite nods and reassurances that if anything ever surfaced, they'd be contacted immediately. But the energy was different now, quieter, distant. It was the kind of grief that no longer drew attention. It simply sat in the background, waiting to be acknowledged. In early 2023, Ellie's mother received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was a retired detective, one of the original investigators assigned to the case in 2015. He had moved out of state, but had followed the case ever since. He wasn't calling on behalf of the department. He just wanted her to know that he hadn't forgotten. During the call, he said something that stuck with her for months. "I never believed she left the backyard. It wasn't said as a theory or a suspicion. It was quiet, confident, like something he carried but had never been able to prove. He didn't offer new evidence, just a memory of how still the yard had felt that night, how the dogs had reacted, how something about the shallow end had never sat right with him." They talked for 22 minutes. Then he apologized, said he was sorry they never found her, said he wished he'd pushed harder. Ellie's mother sat on her porch for hours after that call. She took out the sketch again, the one she had drawn from memory all those years ago. The pool, the chair, the shed, the space between. She circled it again. Nothing new to add, no new information, but it didn't feel like a dead end anymore. Just a thread, thin, unresolved, still waiting to be pulled, and somewhere across town, in a backyard with a dry pool no one wanted to swim in, the smell lingered after every rainstorm. Faint, like it had waited long enough. In June of 2024, Fairhill entered its 3rd month without measurable rain. Lawns dried to brittle stalks, water restrictions intensified, and residents were urged to limit all non-essential use. The new owners of the Franklin house, now 5 years in, finally scheduled long-delayed repairs on the empty pool. Their plan was simple: patch the surface, lay down new tile, and eventually convert it into a greenhouse basin. The pool had sat dry since the day they moved in, untouched except for the occasional sweeping of leaves. By that summer, the cracks along the deep end had widened. One in particular had split vertically near the far wall, enough to let weeds sprout in its seam. A contractor was called in to assess the structure. What he found was not part of any expected maintenance. On the morning of June 3rd, 2 workers began clearing debris from the bottom of the deep end. Most of it was cosmetic: flaking paint, broken plaster, soil runoff from storms past. But while sweeping the far wall, one of them noticed something odd: a vertical line that didn't match the surrounding surface. The line wasn't a crack. It was too straight, too deliberate. He knocked on it with the handle of his broom. The sound was different, hollow, not solid like the rest of the basin. He called over the second worker. They pushed at the seam with a pry tool, and a section of concrete, no wider than a crawlspace door, shifted slightly inward. Behind it was not dirt, not pipework, not rebar. It was a cavity, hand-carved, reinforced with plywood and cement board. Someone had built a wall to hide something behind it. Inside, the space was no more than 4 feet deep, just enough for a person to crouch or lie curled. A flashlight revealed what looked at first like trash: dust-covered scraps, plastic fragments, something fabric wedged beneath a tile. But when the worker pulled gently at the corner, the cloth gave way, revealing faded stitching. 2 lowercase initials, EV. The thread was pink, almost gone, but still legible. There was also a phone, an old flip model, the kind no one had used in over a decade. The battery was swollen but intact, the hinge rusted. One worker called 911 immediately. By the time police arrived, the workers had stepped away and sealed off the backyard. The pool was declared a crime scene within the hour. News of the discovery hit the department hard. Many of the original investigators had retired or been reassigned. Ellie Vaughn's case had sat inactive for nearly 2 years, but the fabric with her initials in the phone were enough to reopen everything. Crime scene units arrived with ground-penetrating radar and excavation tools. The false wall was removed carefully, revealing that the cavity had been intentionally insulated to prevent scent and heat signatures from escaping. Old foam insulation lined the walls. There were no remains, but it was the first concrete evidence tying Ellie physically to the site since she disappeared in 2015. The cloth, investigators later confirmed, had once been part of a jacket Ellie was known to wear, a blue windbreaker with personalized embroidery, a birthday gift from her grandmother. Photos from the time showed her wearing it at school events and in candid party snapshots. The phone was not Ellie's current device. It was older, and police speculated it may have belonged to someone else, possibly used to communicate during the party or to store something. The model was obsolete, but forensic techs began the process of trying to recover data from the SIM card and internal memory. Detectives interviewed the current homeowners, who stated clearly they had never altered the pool beyond superficial cleaning. They were horrified. The wall, they said, must have been constructed before they purchased the home. Structural records confirmed that no permits had been filed since 2014. That meant the hidden cavity had likely existed for 9 years, untouched, sealed behind a wall only discovered because drought had cracked the concrete wide enough to expose it. Ellie's parents were notified that same afternoon. They were asked to come in and view the items. Her mother recognized the fabric immediately. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just placed her hand on the table and stared at it until someone gently asked if she needed a moment. The phone was sent to a lab in Portland. Results were expected to take weeks. In the meantime, police re-interviewed former suspects, party guests, and property owners. Liam Sharp, now living out of state, declined to speak with investigators. Ashley Rourke's location was still unknown. The department issued a statement. "This discovery is significant. It confirms that Ellie Vaughn never left the property. We believe this cavity was intentionally concealed and used to hide evidence related to her disappearance. The case is now active and ongoing." For Ellie's parents, the confirmation was devastating, but not surprising. They had said for years she never left the yard. They'd walked the perimeter dozens of times, called her name into corners no one else searched. What haunted them now wasn't just what the cavity revealed, but what it didn't. There was still no body, no clear sign of what happened to her, no footage, no DNA. Just a forgotten space, sealed for almost a decade, exposed only because a drought dried the soil and cracked the right wall deep enough to give something back. The forensic team worked carefully to preserve the flip phone's memory. Though its battery was bloated and the case had rusted at the hinge, the SIM card and internal SD were still intact. At first, they assumed it would be empty, just an old device accidentally discarded or left behind. But when the data was extracted and analyzed in the state lab, one folder was found containing a single video file. It was time-stamped June 14, 2015, 3 days after Ellie Vaughn disappeared. It ran for 45 seconds. The footage was grainy, unfocused, and had the flickering exposure of a dying flashlight. But what it captured would become the most critical piece of evidence in the case to date. The video was taken from ground level, possibly propped against a garden tool or wedged into a corner. The angle showed the edge of the Franklin property at night, dim backyard lighting, muffled sounds in the distance, and then movement. A figure appeared, dragging what looked unmistakably like a person's body across the uneven lawn. The body appeared limp, the arms trailing. The girl's clothing, though shadowed, was consistent with what Ellie had been wearing at the party. The figure dragging her wore dark clothing and a cloth mask tied around the face. Basic, crude, like something torn from a t-shirt. In one frame, the flashlight illuminates part of the face, just briefly, but it's enough. The posture, the walk, the slight tilt of the left foot with each step. It was all there. Detectives watching the footage didn't say a word. One of them, now with the cold case unit, simply stood up and walked out of the room. He came back minutes later with a printout, an image of Liam Sharp from a party surveillance cam in 2014, showing him walking away from a gas station. Same tilt, same posture, same foot drag. The video didn't show what happened next. It cut off before the figure reached the pool shed. There was no sign of a second person, no digging, no burial. But it was enough. Within 48 hours, a warrant was issued for Liam's arrest. He was found living in Spokane, Washington, working under a different name. He didn't resist. During initial questioning, he denied knowing anything about the video or the phone, claimed he had never seen it before. But when shown the footage, he froze, said nothing, asked for a lawyer. The official charge was obstruction and unlawful disposal of a body. Murder charges were not yet filed. The case lacked a body, a cause of death, and conclusive identification of the girl in the video. But it was the first major break in almost a decade. The phone, however, wasn't his. Records traced it back to a teenager named Miles Renton, the son of the home's former owners. He died in 2012 in a car accident. The phone had likely been left behind when the family moved out, stored or forgotten somewhere on the property. But that raised a deeper question. Why was it still working 3 years later during the party? And who had used it to record the video? Forensics determined the clip had been filmed with that phone and saved directly to the internal SD card. No evidence suggested it had been transferred from another device. Someone had filmed the incident on that exact phone, deliberately, then hidden it, possibly in the cavity behind the pool wall where it was found. Investigators revisited the site. They re-examined the crawl space, the surrounding insulation, and the thin ledge where the phone had rested. Dust patterns suggested it hadn't been moved in years. But the problem remained. None of the DNA found inside the cavity matched Ellie's. Skin cells, hair fragments, and partial prints were recovered from the insulation and plywood. None matched Liam. None matched Ellie. None matched any known party guests. A partial print from the inside panel was traced to a juvenile whose identity was sealed under court protection. All authorities would confirm was that the individual had once lived on the property and moved out years before Ellie disappeared. Despite the video, despite the matching initials on the fabric, the case remained legally fragile. Liam's defense argued the video did not confirm death, intent, or identity. They claimed the person being dragged could not be verified as Ellie, that it may have been a prank, a performance, that the timing of the video, 3 days after the party, raised the possibility it was unrelated, that the file could have been tampered with. The prosecution pushed back, citing behavioral history, deleted texts, and past accusations of aggression. But the lack of a body, and now the presence of unknown DNA, complicated everything. Ellie's parents sat through the arraignment hearing without speaking. Her mother held the worn sketch of the backyard in her lap. On it, she'd marked the deep end with a circle, the same circle she'd drawn years ago. The judge approved pretrial detainment for Liam, citing risk of flight and obstruction. A grand jury was convened. But inside the department, detectives were now faced with a troubling reality. The most damning evidence had come from a forgotten phone belonging to a boy who died before Ellie ever vanished. The person who filmed the crime had never come forward. The DNA in the crawl space wasn't Ellie's, and the case, despite its forward motion, was still without a body, still without a definitive timeline, still, somehow, just out of reach. 2 weeks after the discovery of the false wall, investigators brought in a forensic geophysical team to perform a full ground-penetrating radar scan of the Franklin backyard. It wasn't the first time radar had been used in the case, but it was the first time with updated technology and a narrower focus, specifically beneath the pool's deep end. The scan revealed a small but significant anomaly just below the concrete basin, about 3 feet beneath the area where the phone and jacket fragment had been recovered. It measured roughly the size of a crawl space, compact, irregular, and densely packed. Initial interpretation suggested it was a filled void, possibly a utility trench or an old drainage feature. But investigators weren't taking chances. The area was marked for immediate excavation. On the morning of July 2nd, a forensic dig team began breaking into the lower slab. It was slow work. Dust clouds hung in the summer heat as layer after layer of concrete gave way. Beneath it, they uncovered compacted soil, then something else. Bags of dry concrete, unopened but degraded, placed deliberately to mask what was beneath them. When the final layer was removed, the team found what they had both hoped for, and feared: fragments of human remains. There was no complete skeleton, only partial elements, long bones, vertebrae, and a collapsed ribcage structure. The remains were badly degraded, consistent with long-term burial in a sealed environment, but among them was a molar with a gold orthodontic crown, one Ellie's dentist had installed a year before her disappearance. DNA tests were rushed, expedited through the state's priority channel. 48 hours later, the results were in. It was Ellie. The announcement was made to the public on July 5th. The department released a statement confirming the remains were positively identified through forensic dental records and mitochondrial DNA analysis. Ellie's parents were informed first, in person. Her mother didn't ask how she died. She only asked if it had been fast. The lead forensic pathologist said they couldn't be certain. The remains were too compromised. No signs of trauma were visible on the recovered bones. No defensive wounds, no fractures, no trace of sharp force or blunt impact. Time of death couldn't be determined, but the cavity itself told its own story. It had been lined with industrial plastic, likely to prevent moisture seepage or scent escape. The soil surrounding the body had been mixed with lime, possibly an attempt to accelerate decomposition. The plastic seal had held for years. That's why cadaver dogs in the early searches had struggled. That's why rainwater never caused any visible disturbance. It had been methodical, sealed tightly, hidden under a layer of poured concrete and additional dry mix bags placed on top like camouflage. Whoever created that cavity had done it with time, intent, and a disturbing level of control. And based on the forensic timeline, they had likely done it within hours of Ellie's disappearance. Investigators turned again to Liam. but his legal team insisted he had no knowledge of the burial site. He claimed to have left the party before midnight and maintained he had never returned. Prosecutors, however, now had enough for a new charge. The recovery of Ellie's body, paired with the earlier video evidence and prior text communications, allowed for second-degree murder charges to be formally filed. Liam entered a plea of not guilty. His defense focused on the lack of direct physical evidence tying him to the burial. No fingerprints on the plastic, no DNA inside the cavity, and no known possession of the construction materials used. The state argued the concealment itself was the evidence. They said the burial was too calculated to be opportunistic, that it had been prepared, that the missing link was not the materials, but the timeline. Detectives re-examined the night of the party. The time window between Ellie's last confirmed text and when the last guests left was under 2 hours. No construction noises were heard, no digging, no sounds of struggle. That meant the cavity had likely been pre-existing or dug long before the party began. That raised even harder questions. Who would have built something like that beneath a pool no one used, and why? Attention briefly turned back to the home's previous owners, the Renton family, whose son Miles had died in 2012, the same boy whose phone had recorded the video. Investigators confirmed that minor foundation work had been done on the property years prior, possibly leaving behind an unused cavity. But no permits mentioned sub-pool excavation. No blueprints showed voids beneath the deep end. It remained unclear whether the cavity had existed before Ellie's death or had been created quickly that night by someone who already knew how the yard was built. In the end, what they found confirmed what Ellie's mother had believed all along, that her daughter never left the backyard, that the truth was buried just inches from the first search, that it had waited there, beneath footprints and flashlights, dogs and drills, under barbecue chairs and graduation banners and years of silence. And yet, even with bones in hand, even with the name finally confirmed, one question still hovered. If Liam didn't dig that hole, then who did? And why it had taken 9 years for the earth to give her back? Liam Sharp never confessed. From the day he was arrested to the day the trial began, he held his version of the story, that Ellie had fallen, that it was an accident. That panic took over. He claimed he didn't know what to do, that the party was loud, that no one had seen. He said he was scared of being blamed, scared of how it would look, so he moved her, hid her, said he didn't mean for any of it to happen. But the timeline never made sense. The cavity beneath the deep end wasn't something that could be built in panic. It had been dug, lined, sealed. It took tools, materials, time. Whether it was built before that night or during it, the question wasn't just whether he panicked, but whether he planned. Prosecutors argued that he hadn't acted alone, that the concealment was too meticulous for one person, that someone else had helped, but they couldn't say who. They pointed to the hours between Ellie's last known sighting and when Liam's phone went dark. They showed gaps in GPS logs, erased texts, overlapping digital footprints. But suspicion wasn't evidence. And when they tried to follow the threads, to former party guests, to old friends, to anyone with access or motive, they found dead ends. And then they looked again at Ashley Rourke. She had reappeared briefly during the early phase of the reopened investigation, seen visiting her mother in a rehab facility just outside Portland. Police attempted to contact her through official channels. No response. A private investigator tracked her to a motel in Northern California, but by the time local law enforcement arrived, she was gone. No forwarding address, no trail. The journals she left behind remained part of the case file. And one page in, particular resurfaced, I thought it would stop. I thought I could forget. I didn't know he'd go that far. No name, no date, just those lines in her handwriting, circled twice. The defense argued it was vague and inadmissible. The court agreed. In the end, Liam was convicted of unlawful disposal of a body, obstruction of justice, and second-degree manslaughter. Not murder. The jury deadlocked on the higher charge. Without a cause of death, without conclusive proof of intent, they couldn't convict beyond reasonable doubt. He was sentenced to 12 years, with parole eligibility after 7. Ellie's parents sat in the courtroom and said nothing. They didn't cry. They didn't make a statement to the press. They walked out the side door and didn't return for sentencing. Because to them, the trial hadn't brought justice. It had only confirmed what they'd feared all along, that Ellie had been failed at every stage, by the party, by the search, by the systems meant to protect her, and now, again, by a sentence that felt like a footnote. After the trial, the current homeowners petitioned to demolish the pool. It was approved. In the fall of 2024, the entire basin was jackhammered out, the cavity beneath it removed, the soil leveled and treated. The space was repurposed into a memorial garden, low stone borders, native plants, and a small bench engraved with her initials. Ellie's mother chose the words. She said it didn't feel right calling it a grave, that Ellie didn't belong to that space anymore, that she never had. But she wanted the yard to remember her anyway. When asked what she wanted people to understand, she said quietly, "The house forgot her." But the concrete didn't. The case was officially closed 3 months later. No new suspects, no new charges. The records were archived and the investigative task force reassigned. But the public didn't let it go. Online sleuths dissected the trial transcripts, the timeline, the inconsistencies. Some believed Liam hadn't acted alone. Others thought Ashley had seen more than she admitted. A few speculated the cavity had existed before the party, and that someone much older had helped conceal it. A contractor, a neighbor, someone who knew how to build and disappear. No theory stuck, but none faded either. And one question refused to go away. Not who buried her, not even why, but how. How did a teenage boy hide a body beneath a pool, line a crawl space, seal it with dry concrete bags, and walk back into the party unnoticed? That question still echoes online, on Reddit threads, on cold case forums, in text overlays on TikTok videos that show aerial shots of the backyard, drone scans of the memorial garden, stills of Ellie smiling from her sophomore yearbook photo. But none of the overlays can explain the thing that matters most, because no one, not the detectives, not the jury, not even the man convicted, has ever answered it. Not really. Because for all the evidence, all the pieces, all the time that's passed, one truth remains sealed just as tightly as that wall once was. Someone helped him, and they never came forward.